The cat's okay. The cat's okay. I'm a cat fan. I didn't want to kill a cat in this movie. So yeah, the cat does feature a couple of times, but the cat is probably the one person that gets out truly undamaged, unlike everybody else. They liked what I was doing as a filmmaker, and they liked my attitude towards where I might take the franchise. And from there, they really left it up to me to go and either, figure it out or not. And that was one of the scariest things of all was, I kind of knew myself that if I didn't find a storyline I was convinced by, that I'd have to say no. I'd have to pass on the opportunity. But I was a fan from childhood, so I wanted to give it a really good go and to try and find a pathway. It was a good meeting of minds. They were looking for a fresh direction to break different ground than we'd seen before. So I think they were really hyped when I came back, and it wasn't something that was wrapped up within the cabin in the woods or trying to kind of fold in on itself in terms of the lore that we'd seen before, but actually it was kind of a new direction. So they were super eager once I started to share where my mind was leading me. Yeah, it felt like, in keeping with everything else we were doing with the movie, I wanted to refresh a lot of things. But also there was license there, because with Evil Dead 2013, there was a new book. And when I thought about that, I actually went back to Sam and I said, look, in Army of Darkness, Ash discovers 3 books. He goes out to hunt for 1 book and he finds 3. And I said, on that basis, Sam, you've had 1 book, Fede's had 1 book. Let me take the 3rd book and utilize it in my own way and give it its own sense of personality. But I kind of look at it like an inverse of, the way the Bible functions. It's the same story written by different people, the different gospels. And in this case, it is very much the same book with the same power and the same danger, but it just has a slightly alternate personality. And with that word, it has personality in a way, because it has a certain activation mechanism to it. It's got these teeth that open. It's got a sense of like a pulse underneath the surface. And that's what led me to the idea of the design with this kind of network of veins and arteries on it, that it almost like it feeds in a way, and then it feeds and then it spreads the worst kind of fear. The key thing for me, I remember I had a conversation with Sam Raimi early on in the process. He got excited by the fact that I pointed out my love for the Deadites' ability to employ psychological warfare on the innocent, like to taunt. Evil Dead, even though it's in there and people know it, people talk about the gore and the experiential nature, but there is actually quite a lot of powerful psychology. And I was able to kind of amp that up quite significantly when it was that evil set against family. So what I knew I wanted, and especially with the subversion of, a strong-willed mother into then a terrifying demonic force, a perversion of motherhood. Like, I felt like that she would want to toy and to play. So I think the power of the demonic forces in this movie is they could just wipe everybody out, but they're like a cat with a mouse. They actually want to have a good time. They take pleasure in kind of almost tenderizing the meat before they destroy it altogether. It's great, and it's all I hoped for when I set out. I think when we started the journey, the assumption was that it would always be a theatrical movie, and that's what everybody's intent was. But then COVID started to, get in the way of that, not just for me, but for many, many filmmakers. And with the timing of this movie, I always hoped that in the hope that COVID would pass, that people would go back to cinemas. I've said it before in some interviews, but I think, a lot of filmmakers owe Tom Cruise a beer for holding on tight, and for Top Gun drawing people back to the theaters and allowing people to feel confident about going back in there. And then I was just really, really pleased. And yet it is a cherry on top to have a movie as well that can then, I come from an independent space, so it's great to go to South by Southwest and have your world premiere there. That was a really special moment for me. From there, I think the kind of excitement and the heat around the movie seems to have grown as people have got pulled more into the trailers and the posters and all of the kind of the cool materials that are out there in the world. So it's really nice that we're being given that proper shot, because I always envisaged it as a movie for the big screen, dark room. It's an audience participation film. It's the more people you watch it with, the more fun that you'll have. I was hopeful that the cheese grater would make an impact when people saw the movie. I didn't realize it would have the impact it did just from the trailer, because it only gives you, half the puzzle really. And I think with horror as well, the full context of a scene and the overall tension that you're in and the things that happen before and after all lend themselves to that greater experience. But yeah, it is a movie that's loaded with weaponry, and I had quite a lot of fun, planting those things around the story. That was definitely a lot of fun, and I knew I needed to sow the seeds of the carnage that would come later on, which is something instinctively I enjoy as a storyteller as well. I love a good plant and a payoff. with writing the movie during COVID, I was also stuck around, a domestic space, kind of eyeballing knives and scissors and cheese graters, and then the also becoming infamous staffany as well, which is something to experience. Not really, because I don't think you can go too far, right? And you can always, but I felt like I found the tone in the screenplay that I wanted for the movie, where there's an over-the-top quality to the moments. That's how I envisage them, even on the page. I think people that read the movie, it's interesting, no one really ever had fear and went, oh, is this too much, is this too far? Because I think they just got the tone. I think when you get the tone right, you can actually afford to have more fun. So people find it, as gory and shocking as it is, it's strangely entertaining at the same time. There's a kind of sick, twisted pleasure to the experience of the kills and the kind of more violent moments in the movie. It was never really on the agenda, because part of it as well was Bruce had hung up his chainsaw and didn't want to reprise the role, but also that would get in the way of breaking the ground that we wanted to break. I think there's a lot of talk often about Bruce in Evil Dead 2013, but it's his shadow saying groovy at the end of credits. It's not necessarily tethered to the narrative. People enjoy the fact that he's there. Bruce Campbell does have a cameo in this film, and if you dig in deep enough to it, it could be reasonable to say not only is it Bruce Campbell doing a cameo, but it could actually be Ash Williams, for a couple of seconds buried in the background of this movie. But there is a continuity in the sense that you have Sam's movies in their timeline and you have Fede's movie forward in time, and this movie is ahead of that again. But what was fun about being able to take the third book is we don't know the full journey of book number 3. We do know, when we watch evildeadrise, what happened with the book 100 years ago and maybe where it was hidden and buried, but where was it before then? And potentially, was it instantly hidden away in this building right after the stories we've heard on the vinyl records, or did it go somewhere else first? So I think that's the interesting thing, is it's actually the book can lead you down a thread over time where there could be other junctions where the book has interfered with innocence and created carnage. I do know it in gallons now, because I always used to talk about it in litres being European. It was 6,500 litres, but I think that's about close to 2,000 gallons or something along those lines of blood. But that's all sticky, gooey, hardcore movie blood. I think in other horror movies that have high blood counts, sometimes it might be water with red food colouring when you need a huge amount. But even people would see in the trailer are kind of tidal wave of blood. That's all the real deal. So I think it was without doubt. I think because my physical effects supervisor who created it told me we used more blood on this movie than across all of the seasons of Ash vs. Evil Dead put together, because he worked on those as well. That will tell you kind of how much blood we actually use. Some of it, a lot of it gets used in one or two particular moments, but we didn't hold back on the red stuff, and nobody escaped without getting sticky and gored up. I think the only thing that gave me really specific influence was the spirit and DNA of previous Evil Dead movies. That was the most important thing. Although there's Easter eggs and there's tips of the cap towards certain things, I wanted to capture the essence of them. So that's kind of a given. But outside of that, with my other references, I wouldn't think I want to make something like this. It's actually the things that inspired me to be a filmmaker, probably in childhood, that I have no control over, that are kind of sewn inside me now, so they come out. Because I even think in the prologue in this movie, you could even just get the tiniest hint of Jaws. There's probably a little touch of The Thing in places. There's even a Spielbergian, maybe E.T. or Poltergeisty kind of vibe of some of the early scenes with a family in peril. Not before the evil has shown up, but just a family, in transition or in some sort of emotional turmoil as well. So all of those things were things that I watched when I was a kid that have always had a major impact on me as a filmmaker. And I don't sit down with a list. It's just the way that I write and the way that I think those influences just start to seep their way into what I put down on the page. I think I've left a number of doors open. In my mind, there's probably 4 different places you could go. I think there's the 10 minutes later story with the characters that do survive this film. What happens to them next? And I think in the spirit of Evil Dead, that could be quite fun, where it just goes again. They get a chance to breathe for 10 minutes and then it all kicks off again, because the evil is so difficult to destroy. I also think there's obviously prehistory with the book itself in relation to the vinyl. There's obviously that wraparound in relation to the cabin and what's happened out there. And then cheekily, I can never stop thinking about the cleanup crew that have to come into this building and face off to the carnage that took place and what might happen to those people if they were unfortunate enough to be on the clock that day. think there's going to be a cheese grater etched onto my gravestone.